Welcome, my beauty. He's taking to you. Hello, sweet boy.
Jed Rawlins figured that taking over his late uncle's broken-down horse ranch in the shadow of the crazy mountains was punishment enough for a lifetime of hard living. The day the banker slid a wrinkled contract across his desk, Jed learned he'd also inherited an unpaid debt that came with a strange, unwanted bride named Elara Thorne. She stood in the corner of the bank like a shadow made of patched wool, her eyes fixed on the floor, and the town whispered she was simple-minded and mute. Jed snorted and refused outright, but the banker said this girl was part of the bargain, and if he wanted the deed, he had to take her too. Grumbling under his breath about cursed luck and foolish obligations, Jed threw her one saddlebag onto the buckboard and told her to climb up without any ceremony. Elara didn't speak a single word on the bumpy ride to the ranch, but Jed noticed how her calloused fingers absent-mindedly traced the shape of a running horse on her skirt. The ranch was a mess of sagging fences, empty feed bins, and a magnificent blood bay mustang stallion named Diablo that nobody had been able to break in 4 years. Yet's ranch hands laughed crudely when they saw the silent girl, but Jed barked at them to get back to work and showed Elara to a dusty spare room off the kitchen. The first week, she simply appeared at dawn, mucked out stalls without being asked, and seemed to whisper something soothing to the horses that even Jed couldn't quite hear. One afternoon, Diablo burst through a rotted corral rail and charged straight toward the barn, his eyes rolling wide with a fury that sent every man scrambling for cover. Elara walked directly into the beast's path, lifted one small hand, and began a low, lilting hum that sliced through the commotion like a blade of pure calm. Jed nearly shouted a warning, but his voice died in his throat as the great stallion skidded to a halt and dropped his massive head into the girl's waiting palm. She murmured something ancient into the horse's twitching ear, and within a single minute, Diablo was following her back to the fence like a devoted, overgrown puppy. The ranch hands stood slack-jawed, and Jed felt a dangerous shift in his chest, a mixture of raw admiration and sudden, profound curiosity about this unwanted bride. That night, he found her in the barn, braiding sweetgrass into Diablo's mane, and he finally asked her where in the blazes she learned to tame a killer horse. Elara's voice was soft and crackled from disuse, but she told him her father had been the greatest horse gentler in the Eastern Territories before he was murdered over a prize stallion. She'd been sold off as a servant after his death, and nobody ever asked her what she knew, so she buried her gift deep inside a fortress of silence and survival. Jed sat down on a hay bale and listened for 2 solid hours while she described the subtle language of horse breath, ear flicks, and the rhythm of trust building. By morning, he handed her a rope halter and told her she was now the official horse trainer of Rawlins Ranch, with full authority and his absolute protection. Word spread like wildfire through the territory that the mountain man's unwanted bride could gentle any horse, and cattle barons began bringing their worst kickers and biters to her. She never used a whip or a spur. She used patience, song, and a gentle touch that made even the most scarred and terrified animal willingly offer its back to the saddle. Jed watched her work from the fence rail, and the way the sun caught the copper strands in her hair began to occupy more and more of his waking thoughts. A wealthy horse breeder named Victor Marchetti arrived with a sneer and a vicious blue roan that had hospitalized 3 of his best trainers, demanding she prove her reputation on the spot. Elara stepped into the pen without hesitation, and as Victor made a crude remark about her being a freakish animal herself, Yet's fist clenched around his belt knife. The roan charged and wheeled and screamed, but Elara turned her back at the exact right moment and let the horse come to her, a technique that even Jed had never witnessed before. Within 20 minutes, Victor Marchetti was writing a huge draft of cash, his face purple with humiliation, while the roan nuzzled Elara's shoulder like a tame colt. That night, Jed found her weeping alone behind the haystack, and she confessed that each horse she gentled only reminded her of the ones she couldn't save from her father's murderers. He wrapped his thick arms around her and promised that no man would ever take anything from her again, and she cried until his shirt was soaked and heavy with her release. Days turned into weeks of shared chores, slow evening walks along the creek, and a growing reliance on each other that felt as natural as the seasons changing. Jed asked her to teach him her methods, and he discovered that her quiet wisdom about horses was matched only by her deep understanding of wounded, stubborn hearts like his. A neighboring rancher named Garrett Dixon grew envious of the suddenly thriving Rawlins ranch and began a smear campaign claiming Elara was bewitching horses with dark magic. Elara simply smiled, walked to Dixon's ranch uninvited, and gentled his own prize mare that had been lame with fear for months, and Dixon's men looked away in shame. Jed realized with a jolt that he was no longer merely protecting an obligation. He was hopelessly, entirely in love with the woman who'd been discarded by everyone else. One evening, under a canopy of stars, he built a small fire by the corral where Diablo stood like a guardian, and he took Elara's work-roughened hands in his own. He told her he didn't want a bride by contract, but he wanted her as his true wife, his partner, and the only woman he would ever kneel before with an open heart. She kissed him with a passion that surprised them both, and the mustang whickered softly as if offering a blessing from the wild spirit that bound them all together. They were married in the ranch house with the whole crew as witnesses, and the cook baked a 3-layer cake topped with tiny sugar horses in full gallop. Victor Marchetti, nursing his wounded pride, hired a gang to rustle Diablo and a dozen other horses one moonless night, leaving Elara devastated and Jed white-hot with fury. Elara didn't cry or retreat into silence. She picked up a lantern and tracked the stolen herd over rocky ground, using signs so subtle that Jed marveled at her skill. They caught up with the rustlers in a box canyon, and while Jed held them at gunpoint, Elara stepped forward and whistled a 5-note tune that only Diablo would recognize. The stallion answered with a screaming neigh, kicked down a makeshift gate, and led the entire herd stampeding back to her side, trampling the rustler's stolen gear into the dust. Victor was arrested and sent to a territorial prison, and the newspapers from Cheyenne to Helena printed the incredible story of the bride who spoke the language of horses. The ranch prospered beyond imagination, and Jed and Elara built a breeding program that produced the finest cutting horses and cavalry mounts on the entire frontier. Elara became a legend, not because she conquered horses with force, but because she led them with a grace that reminded everyone that true strength is always gentle. Jed would sit on the porch in the evening, watching Elara teach their young daughter how to braid a horse's tail, and his heart felt so full it could barely be contained. She told him once that being unwanted had been the greatest gift of her life because it led her to a man who saw value where the world saw only brokenness and oddity. When a traveling photographer came through, they posed together with Diablo, and the image was sold across the country as proof that miracles still roamed the untamed West. The ranch became a quanchwadira, sanctuary for orphans and outcasts, a place where any soul, human or horse, could find a second chance at a life of purpose and dignity. Elara's methods were written down by a young journalist and later became the foundation for a new philosophy of horsemanship that spread clear across the great American plains. Jed never tired of hearing her soft voice explain how a horse's trust is never broken. It is only waiting to be found by someone patient enough to listen without demanding. Years later, when Jed was old and gray and Elara's hair shone like silver strands of starlight, they still walked out to the pasture each morning to greet the new foals together. The territory remembered them not as a mountain man and his unwanted bride, but as the couple who built a kingdom of kindness on a foundation of mutual respect and unshakable love. Their story proves that the person the world dismisses as worthless often carries the most extraordinary treasure, hidden in plain sight and waiting for the right heart to recognize it. I sincerely hope this tale of hoarse whispers and unexpected tenderness has warmed your spirit and reminded you that love often arrives in the most unlikely, dusty packages. If this story touched your heart like a gentle hand on a wild horse, please hit that like button and share it so others can discover the power of quiet strength and unwavering devotion. Your subscription to Stories Hub Official is the fuel that keeps our campfire burning, and we'd be honored to welcome you into our family of frontier dreamers and romance lovers. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell me which moment made you cheer out loud, because every single comment builds a community that thrives on connection and story. With a tip of our hat and a grateful heart, we'll meet you again soon under these same stars with a brand new Western tale ready to ride straight into your soul.